Alphonse Gabriel, Al Capone, was one of the most infamous and controversial gangsters in American history. His name became synonymous with crime and violence, and his life, marked by a massive struggle for power and influence, as well as the myths surrounding him, became part of American history and culture. Early life. Al Capone was born on January 17, 1899, in Brooklyn, New York, to Italian immigrant parents, Giovanni and Teresa Capone. His family was Catholic, and they lived in modest circumstances, which likely influenced Capone's future choices. Capone attended a Catholic school but was soon expelled due to violence and bad behavior. In his youth, he came under the influence of New York's criminal elements, which eventually laid the foundation for his criminal career. He worked in several mafia groups, including the one led by John Big Joe Torrio, and by 1920, he had joined the ranks of the notorious gangster of the time, Joe Torrio. Rise to power. In 1925, after Torrio was forced to step down due to an assassination attempt, Al Capone took over leadership of the Chicago Mafia. This marked a turning point in his life. Capone managed to strengthen his hold on the city, establishing a complex network that included illegal gambling houses, bars, restaurants, and prostitution. During this period, the United States was in the era of Prohibition, which banned the production and sale of alcohol. Capone capitalized on this ban by organizing the illegal alcohol trade. His organization, known as the Syndicate, was involved not only in alcohol distribution, but also had connections to many influential politicians and police officers. Capone's gang controlled all of Chicago, and he became one of the wealthiest and most powerful figures in the country. Scandals and violence. Al Capone was known not only for his business dealings, but also for his brutality. His name became associated with violence, murders, and crimes committed to solidify his power. Over the years, Capone was involved in many murders, tortures, and other violent methods used to eliminate rivals and anyone who got in his way. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre, 1929. One of the most infamous and shocking events linked to Capone was the so-called St. Valentine's Day Massacre, which took place on February 14, 1929, in Chicago. On this day, 7 members of George "Bugs" Moran's gang were gunned down in a garage. This murder marked the climax of a power struggle between gangs for control of illegal businesses in Chicago. Although Capone was never officially convicted, there was constant suspicion of his involvement in the crime. Alcohol smuggling and corruption. During Prohibition, Capone became a monopoly on the alcohol market, controlling both its supply and sale throughout the United States. He built an immense fortune through alcohol smuggling and used corruption to control power and law enforcement. Capone worked closely with police officers, officials, and other influential figures, which allowed him to avoid prosecution for many of his crimes. Spreading violence. In addition to murders, Capone was known for his cruel treatment of enemies and even his allies. He used torture and killings to maintain his control and eliminate anyone who might pose a challenge. His brutality was also evident in how he dealt with people who did not comply with his orders, as well as betrayers and blackmailers. Arrest and trial. Despite his powerful organization and extensive protection, Capone could not avoid the law. In 1931, he was convicted of tax evasion rather than for his numerous murders and acts of violence. He was caught thanks to the investigation led by FBI agent Elliot Ness. Capone was sentenced to 11 years in prison and fined $50,000. He served his sentence at Alcatraz prison, where his health deteriorated significantly. Later years and death. After being released in 1939 due to health problems, Capone suffered from neurosyphilis. Al Capone lived a secluded life at his estate in Florida. He spent his final years in poverty and was isolated from society. He died on January 25, 1947, from a stroke, a consequence of his long-term health issues. Legends and myths. Al Capone became a symbol of gangster culture and the American criminal underworld. His life and actions gave rise to numerous myths and legends. The romanticism of gangster life. Thanks to cinema and literature, the image of Al Capone became romanticized and mystified. In popular culture, he embodied the allure of the mafia lifestyle, full of adventure and lawlessness, despite his cruelty. The King of Chicago image. Capone became known as the King of Chicago, and his persona became a symbol of dominance and power in the criminal world. It was believed that his influence was so vast that he effectively controlled the city and its politics. The legend of Prohibition. There's a legend that Capone was so powerful that he could bypass any law, including prohibition. His gang was able to control entire neighborhoods, and he became a figure that symbolized the 1920s in America. Legacy. Al Capone's legacy remains a subject of interest and debate. He became a symbol of crime in America and an archetype for many works of art, from films to books. His life was marked by violence, scandals, and political corruption, but it was also tied to an era when the mafia in America was at the height of its power. Thus, Al Capone remains in history as one of the most famous and controversial gangsters, whose name became synonymous with the criminal world and lawlessness in the 1920s United States.